This is going to be a very interesting discussion today, and we are ready to kick off. So, with that, the topic for today of discussion, and this is taking the masterclass further on consulting. So, this is a consulting masterclass series workshop 2. I hope a lot of you coming back from the workshop 1. Um, Today, we're going to go deeper into consulting. Earlier, we talked about how to start or how to enter actually and build careers in consulting. Here, we're going to talk about the career roadmap because those two words at the end, COVID and post-COVID times, I think that's become really, really relevant in today's world. So, what does consulting look like in terms of a career roadmap? When do I get in? When do I exit? Uh, when do I know when to exit? Um, what do I need to do at every level to go up? And how's COVID and change the situation? And what should one do in the COVID and a post-COVID world, which will come soon? So with that, I am very pleased to announce today we have an absolute consulting stalwart. He's a dear friend of mine. He's a very close colleague and friend who I respect a lot from his pure consulting pedigree. He has had a great experience across pretty much the entire consulting spectrum. He has worked with McKinsey, he's worked with Deloitte, he's worked with BCG. So he's a very well-rounded consultant. I think it's a very deep learning experience in true blue consultant. I think one of the reasons why we selected him because he's probably one of the best case studies that I've known that who spent such deep time in consulting, uh, done different aspects of consulting, and had now moved into an industry role and also moved into a tech based company. So in his work, he leads business planning and operations at Facebook India. He's an MBA from ISB from my batch, and he's over 12, 13 years of experience, really deep industry experience. So we're very, very excited to have Akash here. Um, that's me on the right. I think a lot of you know me or have seen me on LinkedIn. I'm very active. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of MBA Trek. Um, I'm also from ISB. I went to Georgia Tech and DC. I did my environmental engineering both places. I've had a fairly checkered career. I've worked all over the shop. I worked with Accenture for a really long time. I worked with Apple India as well, and I worked in the US as well with Trinity Consultants. So with that, Akash, would you like sort of just want to sort of introduce yourself and talk about your thoughts?
Sure. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, I think good.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Abhishek, for the kind words. As Abhishek said, we go back a long way. We were batchmates in ISP when we met. And as Abhishek also shared, I've spent a lot of time in consulting. I've worked with a couple of different consulting organizations. So my hope is through the session today, I'm able to share a bit more about my experiences, my observations, and some of the sort of questions I debated and the journey that I went through in my own career. And hopefully that will be of use to folks who are making some of those decisions and thinking for the way forward. And also would take the time to reflect a little bit on some choices I made around being in consulting in different roles or different companies, or moving out of consulting for a career that I would look to build in the future. So very excited to be here and looking forward to the questions from this group to share whatever I can best. Abhishek.
Perfect. Thank you, Akash. I know a lot of people have different questions, and we'll try to answer them along the way so that basically it becomes very logical, and it's interesting for everyone. And as I said earlier, uh, any question pops up in your mind, please type it in Alt Edge in the chat window, and we'll continue to answer it. Okay. So so as consultants, we wouldn't be worth our salt if we didn't put down an agenda. for the meeting. So here's the agenda for the meeting. So the agenda is very simple. I want to get into consulting. I've gotten into consulting. I'm in the first year, or if I'm preparing to get into consulting, what is the expectation of an entry level analyst consultant during their first year? Because the first year in consulting, and Akash will tell you the same thing, is the foundation year. So the second question we'll try to answer is, okay, great. So I got through the first year, or the first couple of years. I'm looking to get promoted. I'm going to get to the next level and the next level. So what do I need to move up the ladder in consulting, right? Because it's a highly competitive and one can use the word cutthroat industry, right? So how do I move forward in that? Then the third point actually, which is very interesting, is okay, great. I'm going up and up and up and up. But is there a point where I should be moving out or should be looking at different things? So, A, how do I decide when to exit? And I think the second part of the question is, okay, if I'm going to move on from consulting, or if let's say I'm planning a career in consulting, what could be my potential exit options from consulting and where do I go next? Um, just to have a little bit of fun, and I think it's very relevant in today's time. What we'll cover at the end, and we'll see if we have time, is to cover the COVID effects of on consulting in a way from an industry standpoint and from a learning standpoint. So I think we'll keep that as an extra item on the agenda. If we get there, I think it'll be for everybody's benefit. So, but we'll see. So the first four things we'll definitely cover for sure, and we'll see if we can get to the item number 5 as well. So with that, I'm going to move ahead. Uh, so the first question we want to answer is, what do you do in your first year? And I think we thought about it quite a bit and we said, what is the simplest framework or thought we can give you? And again, as consultants, we can't live without frameworks. So here's the most simple thing. It's about being ready and relevant. So ready means obviously having the right set of skills that are required for a first year analyst or consultant or the early consulting career. uh, your understanding of the corporate world and industry, and that's where the industry awareness comes in, has to be far more than any of your other batchmates or colleagues or friends that you know, because consulting demands a very very high standard there. um, the relevant part is actually very different. Consulting is a very different industry compared to others. Consulting is an industry per se doesn't always have the highest levels of patience. So there is a pure demand of you to deliver from day one, and that's why a lot of the consulting offers are the most lucrative on campuses, are in generally in the market. Um, there is also a push for consultants to see beyond, above and beyond. And finally, I think the key piece in consulting is it's a people-led business, right? So collaborating and leading tends to be very core items that one should work on almost always. Uh, um, so interestingly enough, for an industry which demands a lot of IQ, I think EQ also has a big role to play. So Akash, your thoughts on this? Just wanted to get deeper into this a little bit.
Thanks, Abhishek. So I think for me, the frame that I use and have always used and continue to improve over time is, in consulting, no matter what level you are at, your growth is a function of one. If I were to use one word, it's value. Now, that will sound like either too easy or too global. But so, what does value mean in this world? And if we are talking in context of you're new to consulting, you're in the first year or second year, what does value mean? That's what we should focus on. But remember that frame, for me, the frame is how are you bringing value at whatever level you are. And one important element behind that is you can only bring value at a sustained level if you enjoy the experience that you're going through, because it takes a lot. to deliver value in the consulting world. So that's one frame that I will start with for this group. Now, coming to early days in consulting, typically these roles are analyst, associate roles, depending if you're joining from a grad school or a post grad school. Now, some of the things Abhishek has shared here, for me, if you think of how a consulting team is delivering value to a client, you are working very closely with your client, and the focus is on solving a certain type of problem. The problem could be long-term strategy, the problem could be medium-term goals, the problem could be a very process-oriented situation which requires to be run very diligently, and they are taking external help for that. And there could be different frames of that. In that world, if I look at someone who's playing an analyst type of role, value for me is a rigor and quality of basic problem solving. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you are doing a strategy project. A lot of that will include understanding what are the markets like, how are the markets growing, how do you even break down the problem statement to say that, hey, I want to enter the motorcycles market. Can you understand the motorcycles market quickly? Can you look at research to say, yes, I understand the motorcycle market and I know what trends are playing underlying them. I know how consumer demand supports that. So that value for me here is someone who has rigor to go through all of this material, someone who has rigor and quality to collect the relevant information and not just come and tell me, here is data, come to me with insights. It is also someone who, if you've done one or two projects, you're bringing your learnings from other projects to my project, right? So that's the point on industry awareness. You may have worked in pharma industry, you may be now working on an auto industry, but there are learnings from pharma manufacturing that you could potentially bring to auto manufacturing, or the supply chain of a pharma company, and you bring that to a auto company. A lot of innovation actually happens because you take best practices and learnings from one experience and you take that to another experience. So that rigor and that thinking is very critical to these roles. As the other aspect that is pointed out here, which is see around the corners. Now, you are relatively new to the consulting world. This may be your first job, but the expectation is, and what will do you very well throughout your career is, you're not just you get up in the morning and say, let's say Abhishek is your manager. Abhishek told me X, so I will just go do X. No, you're someone who will look at Abhishek's question, think about his question, and then think about what are the different pieces that could go into solving these questions. You may be sitting with your client and talking to your client. And at that point, you may get a piece of information that could be useful for you to frame your overall problem statement. Hence, it's not a very unidimensional way of working on looking at the situation. It's a very broad-based way of looking at the situation, filtering out what's relevant and bringing that back to your team. So that is another way you generate value. That's another way you identify and bring insights which are useful for your work. And then there is a element of collaborate and lead. Now, as Abhishek said, consulting is a lot about teamwork, and these teams mostly will be small teams, 3 people, 4 people at max, where a lot of groundwork, a lot of analysis, a lot of sometimes client relationship management also is driven by folks who are at analyst position. Now here, and these are sort of tight timelines environments. Your clients obviously have a lot of expectation from you. So in that environment, how do you work closely with this team? For example, can you take a step back and say, I know the problem statement. Here is what I will bring to the table. That will make your manager's life, your partner's life so much better, because they will see someone who's willing to take ownership, someone who wants to contribute a lot, someone who wants to bring value. Similarly, when you're interacting with your clients, just the way you interact with them, it's not just about you're my client and I'm just an analyst who's going to do maths, but I'm someone who's going to add value even in the conversations I have with you. I will share my learnings and I will equally tap into your learnings. So that uh, emotional quotient of how you engage within your team as well as with your clients and within your network is of equal value and importance as you are in the early stages of that role. Abhishek?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Akash. I think very deep sort of understanding around this. I'll just do a couple of quick checks. There are a lot of questions coming through, so Akash, so we'll answer them. Uh, just so that we have a clarity from everyone. Is the audio something that you're struggling with? Because a couple of people have written back saying audio quality is not great. Please let us know. You can chat again, type down in the chat window. I hope everybody is comfortable with the audio.
And Abhishek, are you able to hear me clearly, or do I need to be
Yeah,
louder?
I can hear you. I can hear you
Okay.
clearly. I hope you can hear me as well. I
Yes.
think some people are saying it's fine. So yeah, I think it's good. Okay, so maybe it's a bandwidth thing. Apologies. We will share the recording with you, so don't worry, please. Uh, uh, don't worry about that. So I think there was an initial question about I'm in my final semester of MBA, to start off my career, what kind of jobs and skills I need. I think Akash, you did a great job of answering that. Um, there's another question coming from Himani. I think, Himani, great question, Akash. The question is, how can one move from one type of consulting to another? So, for example, if someone is an IT consultant and wants to move to management consulting, let's say per se, how does one make that happen? And does one's career in IT consulting draw any relevance to when they apply for, let's say, management consulting roles?
I think that's a great question. And let me sort of, before directly jumping to the answer, let's take a step back and see what IT consulting and management consulting worlds are like, right? So, what are you doing in IT consulting? You are essentially saying in a world which is increasingly going digital, in a world where IT infrastructure is not just something that's the back end, but increasingly the front end of how companies engage with their customers, you're helping an organization which may be very old in terms of heritage and history, make the transition to the new world, or you may be working with a client who's forward looking and who's saying that I want to be the leader of how I engage with my customers in the future, and I know digital is the way out. So how do I do that, right? So I think this, even in when if you're doing IT consulting, that frame of how you are, again to my point, delivering value to your client, how you solving business problems. I think sometimes people think about IT consulting as process, I see IT consulting as technology. IT consulting is a equal uh, value creator for the business. So first thing for you is, if you are an IT consulting, start focusing on how are you solving the business problem. What is the business problem that you are solving? How does your work on a day-to-day basis create value? And create value could, by the way, simply be more profits. You move from older IT system to a new IT system. It is more agile. It does the work faster, and it generates savings for your client. That is business value. That is what the client wants, more profit. Your system may be enabling the client to go to new markets or sell more products or reach new customers, which they could not before. That's growth for the client. So take the frame of value, take the frame of business, and how is your work in IT consulting delivering that? Because at the heart of consulting is, how do you deliver value for your clients, no matter what the problems do. Now, switching over to management consulting, I think one thing to just reflect back on is the world of consulting, even 5 or 8 years ago used to be, there are some companies that will do only strategy, there are some companies who will only do IT, there are some companies who will solve a very specialist boutique problem statement in pharma supply chain. The world has integrated a lot more in the last decade. Let me give you an example, right? So when I was at McKinsey, a lot of focus was on saying, how do we develop almost digital assets for our clients and help them solve their business problems through products that are digital first. I saw a lot of work happening around there. Over time, as a lot of companies in India or globally were making the transition to new technology, McKinsey teams were involved in not just thinking about what that technology should be, but also helping in aspects of how do you move towards that technology? How do you do the transition? As of today, McKinsey, whether it's McKinsey, BCG, Bain, all of them have their digital arms. So BCG Digital actually has capabilities around They can actually work with you to say that let's prototype something, let's test something in the market, let's see what the response is like. And it all started from saying, I want to go, as a client, I wanted to go digital first and I want to test these things in the market. So that world has got a lot more blurry. So while you will still think of companies in those categories, but all of them are starting to come together and do more. Let me take the example from Deloitte. Now, Deloitte has a very large arm focused on strategy and operations, but they have an equally large arm that is focused on how to think about IT capabilities, how to run those IT capabilities, and increasingly, the way this team operates is not in silos. They work together because if you're going to a client and making the pitch on business growth, it is equally about which market you will enter, but so much so about how will you enter. And a lot of times the answers today are digital, right? So I think that's the environment of how consulting is evolving, and I expect that to evolve even faster. Because the pace at which the asks from clients, the way of operating and engaging with the customers is changing. That is very rapid right now. And I know we have some of that later in the conversation, so we'll come to that. But now going back to the original question of if I am working in IT consulting and I want to move towards management consulting, I would frame it along these lines. One, take a step back and see how do you generate value? Because no matter what conversation you will go to, the first question will be what is it that you do and how do you generate value? How do you solve business problems? So you need to know the frame of how you are solving business problems today. Then the second aspect is some of the skills even that you see on the slide here. At the heart of it is, are you someone who can solve problems? Are you someone who can frame problems? Are you someone who has the diligence to work in the environment of management consulting, which can be very demanding? And are you someone, like I said earlier, you have to have that energy and that passion to keep doing this on a sustained level, and that's a choice you're making. So those, and you will be asked questions because you worked a little bit, so you could potentially be a lateral hire around in your prior work. How did you do these things? So examples of how you tackled some of these questions in your prior life will be extremely helpful. And I think part of the question was also if I am in my MBA and if I'm in my last semester, how do I prepare around these things? Some tactical stuff is more around there is enough material out there that helps you think about the basic questions that consulting companies ask. For example, you will likely do a case study, right? Now, case study doing, there are process and steps and all of that you can read, but at the end of the day, management consulting is taking a problem statement, defining it correctly, breaking it down into the right parts, and then taking a systematic approach to solve. And along the way, you will likely make a few calls. That's where they will test you on the logic and how well thought through you are when you are working through the problem. Industry expertise is an add-on and of great value, but I wouldn't say that in every conversation they expect you to be a master of 5 industries. They would expect you to know where you work. I hope that answers the question.
So Akash, thank you so much. Really detailed answer. I'll add two things to it. Just from my experience, I worked at Accenture. Accenture, I think, and I think I'm boasting for a second, but I think Accenture has got the mix between management consulting and IT consulting absolutely right. So in Accenture, there is no IT or management consulting; it's all consulting. Accenture is one large organization. It's actually it's crazy. It's like a little bit like a government. It runs like a government. There are 20 departments which then collaborate on one thing. So I mean, I think the classic example, if I can ever share, and it's a public example, so I'll freely share. The Hotstar app was actually created by the Accenture strategy team. The app was built and developed by the Accenture technology team, and the app was maintained in its initial years, and not sure what's happened lately, but it was maintained and the backend was done by the Accenture outsourcing team. So it it's one company which has done everything. In fact, even before Hotstar came in, Accenture strategy created work for Star Sports India and ESPN to say you need to find a way to provide streaming because a lot of your content is getting pirated. People are actually running pirated streams, and they showed them data around that. And so I think honestly, in IT consulting in today's world, the key thing is, if you're moving to management consulting, you need to align very nicely. And I think Akash gave you the hint to the digital vertical there. What is it that the digital vertical is doing? Because see, digital verticals at management consulting firms are still very nascent compared to pure IT consulting. They are very good and very unique with what they're doing, but they cannot necessarily compete with the Wipro, Infosys, and TCS, because they just have the advantage of vintage. They've been doing it for 30 years, 40 years. So if you come from pure IT based consulting, if there is something that you have done new there, or something that is very unique, and that capability is not available on this side, or that is a capability on the management consulting side which they want to grow, I think that's the hook you have to provide to people. Hey, I bring that experience. I know you're looking for that experience. And then, and Akash also mentioned one thing very interestingly. He said lateral, because the lateral hire in consulting comes with a premium, right? A premium of salary, the premium of the role, the premium of good projects and all that. So that premium will also arrive. But for that premium to arrive, you also have to convince someone that what I have done in the past is of great, again, using the same word, great value to you, right? Because value basically means very simple. I can sell you in front of the customer. If I can sell you in front of my client, you're of value to me. It's as simple as that. Consulting is fundamentally that business. I think just going down into this question, I think it's always a marquee question, Akash. If I'm not from a top tier college, I'm a tier two college, how do I make it into consulting? How should one build and enter that? Is that something? Uh, I mean, that's something everybody keeps thinking about. Your thoughts on that, Akash?
No, I think that's a very good question and a very pertinent question. So the way I would frame that is, one is, as Abhishek also shared, right now, as consulting companies are expanding their portfolio, they are also looking at folks from different skill sets, right? So what traditionally would have been, hey, I will go to an MBA school and I will go to an engineering school and I will maybe go to a few Delhi University schools and get folks. Now the portfolio has sort of expanded, right? So if you are from a school which is not necessarily tier one, what you need to focus on is what type of roles is the consulting company hiring for, and can you find the right fit over there. Second is, I think also consulting companies have been investing actually for a while now in capabilities that are, some are more client facing capabilities and some are capabilities around deeper expertise which help and work with these client teams very closely, right? So I mean, folks may have heard about it. McKinsey, BCG, Bain all have capabilities, and they're literally called capability centers. I think Bain calls it capability center. McKinsey used to call it knowledge center. Now there you are in more specialized roles. You are someone who may have more deeper finance experience, and you will work with the client teams on selective finance focused projects. Or you may be someone from supply chain background or supply chain work that you studied in, and you will work more closely with their supply chain practices. Now these teams not only work with client teams and engage closely with them, they also build a lot of new capability in these companies. So for example, during my days at McKinsey, um, a very close friend of mine was part of the supply chain team, and his focus was building a supply chain global tool that helps McKinsey assess and engage with clients on how their capabilities are versus some of the industry benchmarks. Now, that requires a lot of groundwork, that requires a lot of deeper knowledge that we develop over some time. And bringing that together, that now is being used in multiple client discussions and evolving a lot of these capabilities. So I think one track to look at is, as the portfolio of roles and the type of roles expand in consulting organizations, how do you look at a role which is more closely related to your education, and as well, a lot of for their hiring, they look at tier two schools and beyond, to look at the right candidates. Second thing is, if you think of the tier 2 band, and as hiring sort of requirement has grown over time, you have to also equally think about how do you position yourself within your school, right? So let's say a McKinsey is hiring for a certain role for which they are good with going to a tier 2 school, but again, there will be multiple applicants who will want to apply for it. So what you need to do for yourself is to ensure how do you differentiate yourself if a McKinsey or a BCG or any other consulting firm that you target comes to your campus, that you are the right candidate for them. So it's equally about matching demand and supply. The demand is growing for multiple types of roles. How do you ensure you are the candidate that can bring that value? And to me, some of those aspects go back to what Abhishek and I were talking about earlier, is showcasing your right experiences, showcasing your capabilities, and ensuring that when you are in a conversation with them, you are able to highlight how you will bring value to them, right? So I think that's one way to look at it. Another way that people have tried and has worked in bits and pieces is, many times we look at these companies and want to target the local market. Some, like, you may want to work with any of these companies, but you want to work primarily in India. Now, given just our talent pool and size of the country, obviously it's a very competitive environment. Many folks I know that have looked outside of India and then gone ahead and applied and look to engage with, say, a McKinsey in Dubai, or you engage with a McKinsey in Europe, and see if that conversation moves through, because the demand supply situation of local offices and the local market can vary by the growth trajectory. So if, let's say, the Middle East region offices are growing very fast, they may not be able to find the right kind of talent pool within the market, and they will be looking to source from other markets. Can you reach a growth market over there? And I think another element for thinking about, if again in the context of the question, is today's world also enables us to upskill ourselves with the latest of what's in demand, right? So, for example, we were talking about digital capabilities of these companies. Some of our traditional schools may not be enough to equip you with, in today's world, to be a data scientist, for example. You may not be in that kind of course. So don't constrain yourself with the education that you're going through the traditional medium. Upskill yourself. There are more than enough mediums out there right now that allow you to, whether it's online education or doing a certain type of project or getting certified by the right kind of companies, that gives you a more complete profile for multiple roles that these companies would be hiring for, and helps you differentiate compared to the pool that may be applying for these roles. Abhishek?
Thanks, Akash. Just looking at other questions, Gaurisha has some interesting questions. So I'll go through them quickly and I'll try to answer them as well. So question is, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, Accenture, do they have HR consulting departments? Yes, it's huge. So in Accenture, the talent and organization was the largest workforce at Accenture, and by a huge margin. I'm sure very similar at Deloitte as well. Accenture and Deloitte tend to, in my mind, given my experience, and Akash hopefully will validate that, they tend to rely very heavily on the HR and the talent for both revenue, profitability, size of business. So that's actually one of their core strengths, I think, doing
Yeah.
large transformations on the HR level. And IT also requires a lot of HR related projects around change management. So, I mean, it's huge. So I actually, so there's some questions around HR and, how can one transfer? I actually believe HR is very ripe for a comeback in this whole COVID scenario, because there is so much focus now on employee productivity, employee engagement, employee well-being. Suddenly now employee well-being is a big thing, right? There's something called BCP, business continuity process, or BCM, business continuity management, something I had worked on Accenture like 7 years back actually. And it was funny when we were working on this on that project and thinking, we were like, who's going to buy all of this stuff? We're just building things in the cloud. And I guess now it makes all sense. in the COVID world. So I think anybody from an HR background, I think it's a very good time in consulting, particularly because there will be a lot of work which will come, maybe not immediately, but maybe in the 6 to 12 month period, where a lot of companies realize, hey, I mean, I may have to go partial work from home. I may have very distributed workforces. I need to get people engaged. I need to get people to meetings. I need to get people working in a very random way. Nobody's going to, half of my staff is going to come to office. Half of it may not. There may be a government regulation which may force you actually. What do you do? How do you manage that? So I think uh, HR is something that is big on in consulting, especially in the likes of Accenture and Deloitte. Maybe MBB is smaller just because they are also smaller firms, but I don't think from a quality of work standpoint or, or there is it's any lesser actually. Um, there's also a question, Akash, and probably you can mention give an answer that obviously a lot of these consulting companies come to a lot of universities and say we are only looking for people who make great presentations and have great soft skills and talk and can do a lot of work on the back end and do a lot of quant work and heavy analysis. Is that is that how all entry level jobs are, or is it different?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think just to respond to the previous question, yes, HR practices are really big, especially in the Big Four and Accenture. As a matter of fact, my wife used to work in one of the Big Four HR consultancies at the start of her career. So definitely, if you are interested in that sort of area, there are enough consulting presence in the larger companies as well. Now, coming to the question, the way I understood is, are all entry level roles really about doing the back end work? Are they really about doing the grunt work, for a lack of a better word? I Short answer is no, by the way. For me, and looking back at my entire journey and my days as an analyst, it's a function of what weightage of your time goes in that direction. So let me take an example, right? Let me compare one example from when I was leading project teams as a project leader versus when I was an analyst. As a project leader, the amount of time that I have spent with my clients and my partners' calendars is insane. Just if I have to set up a board meeting, I have to work with and these are senior folks on both sides. I spend so much time getting to ensuring the right people are in the room and their calendars allow for it, and we figure out a right meeting. Now, if you're someone, you take a step back and say, "Hey, that's grunt work." I mean, I had an assistant. Even then, I spent time on thinking about who the right people are, ensuring they get why they need to be there, and ensuring that they turn up. Right. So that's one type of grunt work that you sometimes have to do. Now let me compare it to the analyst level. At the analyst level, yes, there is a lot of Excel modeling that you would do. Now, why? Because in a small team, you are the owner of all ground thinking. It is not about doing Excel formulas. It is actually about saying, if, for example, the question is, how big is this market? How do I bring in different data points that bring an intelligent, well thought through answer that a client will be comfortable with? So now that is not back end work. That's actually the heart of the work that needs to happen for the page that will go in front of the client to say that if you want to enter this industry, this is the size of the market, this is the growth of the market. So it's not grunt work, it's actually heart of the work, heart of the answer. Now, the equally related question was, is my job full time to just sit and make slides? No. Here is why. As a project leader, I was creating slides for the board. As a project leader, I was creating thinking and framing and project plan slides for my partner. Now, my analyst was making the slides for how big is the market, how is the market growing, because he's doing that, he or she is doing that work. So we create materials around the work that we are doing, just that the project leader is doing a certain part of the project. As an analyst, you are doing a certain part of it. Now so while you're shared, that's why it's a question of percentages, because you are at the heart of the analysis that's being done. A lot more of your time is about that analysis. A lot more of your time is creating materials around that analysis. And in most projects, you will be mapped to a certain client, right? It will typically not be the case that you've sat the whole day in your team's room and you did not go and talk to a client. You cannot do consulting like that. Even at the analyst level, there are clients that you are responsible for. There are clients that you have to engage with. There are clients that you have to work more closely with. Just the percentage distribution varies. As you move from being an analyst to a consultant to a project leader, the mix starts to change. By the way, the project leader cannot operate without what you do. So the heart of work is sitting with the analyst, with the consultant. The proportions start to vary. And I know later we have a section about the different stages in the careers, along the career of a consultant. These mixes start to reflect. But the one thing that I would say is that there is a certain expectation setting that the client, that your own team will do with you. But part onus is on you on how you come out and participate in client engagements. How do you participate in engaging with the level of, with the tier of clients that you're managing, and also participate in larger senior stakeholder meetings. I mean, during my analyst days, we were, one of the interviews was interviewing the COO of the company, and I had my three questions. I asked my three questions, right? And it was not like I went to the into the room saying, "Do I have permission to ask this question?" No, I think when a consulting firm takes you, there's a lot of faith in your capability. There is a lot of belief in what you can deliver. That is part of your hiring. What you as an individual, even at an analyst or a consultant level, need to do is ensure that you understand the dynamics in the room. You take the time to think about how you want to frame the problem, so that again, if you're asking a question to a senior guy, he sees value in that question. So it's all about how you deliver value. And as I said, the mix of what you are doing evolves as the career evolves. But at no point is the role one of those where you're sitting in a dark room for 7 days in a week and nobody has seen your face. Abhishek?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add from my personal experience, I was hired in Accenture to start a practice. So I didn't build slides. I actually built slides about who to hire. So my experience was very different at an analyst level. In fact, the demands for me at an analyst level were a lot higher than I could have ever expected. I was probably operating at a manager level, being paid an analyst salary, or slightly more than that. But um, it was very different. And just to answer a couple of questions, a lot of people said, because this is my own personal experience, so I can share. Are referrals important in consulting? I think very important, at least in Accenture. I mean, I got referred into Accenture actually. Met a consulting partner. I presented my pitch to them separately. They liked me so much, and they actually referred me for a different business. So yeah, I think referrals are very important, especially if you are in that tier 2 or tier 3 and you don't have the direct connection of the campus placement. I think if you know somebody in consulting, I mean, and LinkedIn is a great forum, right? You can come up with a nice idea, present it, see if you can get an opportunity through Zoom or someone to present it to a consulting leader. And you never know, they might find something very interesting and they may say, hey, listen, this person I want in my team. Then, and you'll be surprised how quickly consulting companies can change their criteria when they actually want someone. Suddenly, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, Akash has been there. He's hired a lot. When you need someone and you need the skill, you will pay as a consulting company whatever you feel like. You will get them from whatever company. I've known people who have been pulled out from their jobs because we needed them on the project. They are working in some other company. We've asked them, we have badgered them into leaving their job to come and work for us. And I'm not sure if that person at that point was actually convinced about coming and working for us. But we badgered the person so much that they eventually said, okay, fine, I'll work for you. Um, I think, Akash, if we can continue with the presentation, I
Yeah.
think people are waiting for that. And then we'll take some of these questions later, right? Okay. I think this is where the rubber hits the road, and I think a lot of the questions all of you are having. We kind of had this slide in the previous workshop as well, but this time we're going to take a very different view. This time the view is going to be what does it take to succeed at every level, right? And I think Akash, what I will lay down the structure so that then you can talk through this is, see, essentially most of us who enter will either enter at the analyst level if you don't have an MBA, or you enter at a consultant or business analyst level as an MBA. And I think a lot of you had questions around that. I hope this answers that. That is sort of the fundamental difference. A lot of times the companies make a distinction between somebody who has done an MBA. Those analysts are basically like MBA analysts, and then there is just the other regular pool of analysts. It takes you about maybe 2 to 3 years at this level to get to what could be engagement manager, project manager, many definitions or many titles around that. An engagement manager is a fairly decent amount of time. It's at least 2 to 3 years at the engagement level, and even probably more before, excuse me, before you get to sort of a senior manager role, and then you get into sort of principal partner. A lot of companies have again different definitions around this, but these are people who will lead larger teams, maybe have a small P&L to run, or not small, actually significant P&L to run, will have very clear sales targets. And over a period of time, you become a proper senior partner where you will be leading very large teams. You may be leading regions, you may be leading lines of business in industries and whatnot. So that's sort of the progression over a period of time. But obviously the progression has stage gates at every level. So consulting is not an industry which promotes you just because you have spent 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years doing something. uh, a Consulting will only promote you as and when they feel that you are ready to move to the next level. So there is a system in consulting called up and out. So consulting would rather have you out than go up if you're not ready. So Akash, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. So I think a couple of points. One is, as I started, for me, the frame is along each of these steps, how do you generate value? And we'll spend some time on that. The other piece which Abhishek was referring to, I think, uh, is the point. Consulting has, most consultancies have this model of saying you get promoted when you are already playing that role. And what does that mean? So, for example, if you are a consultant and in the first year you are wrapping your head around how your role works and you starting to mature in it, in the second year is not about now I understand the role, so now I will play this role full time. Second year is about saying, okay, I've got my role. I'm good at it. Now let me start thinking about what the next level the engagement manager does. And let me start showing some of those capabilities. Let me own a little bit more than what I do. So in consulting, you get promoted when you already play that role for one full review cycle. And only then in the formal cycle when it happens, people who they assess you look at the fact that yes, I do see this person playing a role which is ready for the next level. He's done XYZ things that give us proof that he has already shown some of those capabilities. Now we should promote him. So that's just a frame to keep in mind. Now if I have to think about an individual's journey across all these different roles, I would put it, think of a three-dimensional vector. One is your client. Second is your immediate senior in the consulting group. And third is, and that's a function of the roles, is there someone who is reporting into you or someone that you're managing? Now, when you think of this trajectory across these roles, it's a function of how are you generating value across these three axes. If I'm an analyst, my primary focus for generating value is towards my engagement manager. There is part of it that is focused towards the client, and there is no value attribution to someone reporting to me because you are the junior most member of the team. Now, as you move toward a consultant, you may not have an analyst working with you, but your primary focus is your engagement manager, but a larger share starts to go towards the client. If I'm the engagement manager, and that role is really at the heart of how the team runs, client is my primary focus. My partner is the next one that I focus on, and my team that I'm managing. Am I running that? It's almost a 33, 33, 33 sort of breakup because I'm responsible for the success of this project. And as you move towards the more senior roles, associate principal, principal partner are essentially the guys who are primary focus in their early role is the client. And then you are working with your engagement manager on the team on managing the junior team members. But now I'm also starting to take responsibilities around how do we build our organization. So that's when a fourth element almost starts to enter to say that at the associate principal partner level, hey, how do I build a new capability? How do I build a new practice? How do we improve capabilities that we have as market requirements and dynamics are changing? And the principal to partner to a senior partner journey is about really at each stage you map to more senior clients. So maybe you are mapping to the CEO, then you start mapping to the board, then you start mapping to the founder. So you undergo that journey. So, but it's along these axes where the value expectation and your opportunity to deliver something concrete starts to evolve. And just to recap, at the analyst level, it's really about doing the heart of the work that ensures that we show value to the client. For the consultant, it's the heart of the work plus doing some bit more of client management. As an engagement manager, heart of the work, oversee the heart of the work, guide my analyst, guide my consultant. And guide here doesn't really mean get up in the morning and say, hey, go do this. You actually have to very deeply problem solve with them because your analyst may come and ask you a question and I am not able to make progress. Now what do I do? Or you see that your analyst is taking a certain path, but you based on your prior experience, you know that that may be a tricky path and you guide him along the right direction. So it's your team, it's your partner, because the partner will come to you and say, tell me how the project is going. Is there a problem that I need to solve? And equally managing the client, because the client is going to call you. He will pick up the phone at any point in the day and just give you a call and say, hey, how is this moving? I have a question. Can you answer that question for me? He may call up and say, hey, I don't like what you're doing. How do you do that differently? So that's the engagement manager. And then roles above that are sort of starting step beyond the construct of just that project. It's about how do we grow the business by selling more projects? How do we build more capabilities? How do we take care of the people beyond just the teams that are working on our projects? And as you keep going more senior, you are playing more industry leading roles. You could be doing more thought partnerships. You could be on different forums sharing the organization's point of view, representing the organization. So that's how I would look at sort of value evolution across the different phases of consulting. Abhishek.
I think very simple for me. The way I would simplify it is it's an IQ versus EQ battle. So when you start off, you are higher on the IQ front, lower on the EQ front. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen a lot of analysts make, and and this is what I've seen with very bright analysts who come, by the way, from the best of colleges, from the IITs and the IMs and all the other top tier schools. A lot of people get hired into consulting because of the process and the system and everything, have very good IQ, but they have very low EQ, and that EQ gets them into trouble very quickly. Because the thing is, most consulting companies, by the way, and because we are ex-consultants, so I will be very honest here. They are also very transactional about it. They also know that this person is so smart, so brilliant. Let's use him or her for the first 2 3 years, and only if they show the EQ will we promote them, and we will not necessarily work on actually building their EQ, because building somebody's EQ is a lot of effort, right? And actually that effort has to be made by the person, cannot be done externally very effectively. So a lot of consulting, a lot of people you will see will enter consulting, and very quickly after 2 years, it's just like a right turn, they'll just completely exit consulting. They'll either go open their startup, or they'll go work somewhere else or do something else and all that. So that's a big thing for me. It's an IQ versus EQ battle. So yes, you start off with IQ being very important and technical data skills and all that. But if you don't have the EQ skills, it's very simple for me. You could have 2 years, 4 years in consulting, and you'll be done. You can't move for further, because EQ means you ability to convince people, ability to negotiate with people, ability to be the person that people want to talk to and want to work with, right? And I think those skills, everybody keeps saying, what are the hard skills, what are the hard skills? I say, for me, throw all the hard skills out of the window. Please learn EQ, because if you can't learn EQ, you're not going to go up in other parts of your career, sure, but in consulting, definitely not. Because remember this, in consulting there are already far too many personalities in the room. So if you're the person who is bringing everybody together, you will always be valued and respected very highly by people who are even smarter than you, because they know I may be way smarter than you, but the next smart person in the room will not speak to me because of an ego clash. But both of us will speak to you because we both like you. So you become the bridge, you become the mediator. I think that's the fundamental message. If I were to leave the group with here, that remember, focus on the EQ. Are you the person who can manage people, who can manage teams over a period of time, and who can get people to do things for you, right? uh, Not by being dominating, by actually being collaborative, right? And I think that is the essence of, at least that was something that I think Accenture did very well for a lot of us, as managers. When I left at a senior manager level, that for me, that was the big test. Can people collaborate? If they can't collaborate, they can't work in teams, if they're not friendly enough, doesn't work for us, right? It won't, you will not grow in consulting per se.
Yeah, and I think one more point to add is, which is a reflection for me after leaving consulting, is no other industry actually offers you this kind of predictability to career growth. They are giving you an invitation to say that come and do well with us, and every 2 years there is a next ladder for you. That kind of predictability is generally not there in the industry. There could be other types of flexibility, but this kind of predictability, that yes, if you do well, you will every 2 years there is a window to go up to the next level, is actually not that common. Secondly, I think what consulting is also evolving to, by the way, too, is this is the most well settled and probably 80% of the organization track. For those as most of us are interested in consulting, what it has also started to delve into is some sort of specialist roles. Like after a point, you're someone who's, maybe, hey, I want to do more of X field, I want to do more of X type of work. Consulting is starting to become more accommodative of how they can retain the best people. See, consulting, what is the asset of consulting? Asset of consulting is having the best people. And they actually now go a long way to accommodate the best people in their teams. And hence, this standard track now also offers some leeways along the way. Leeway doesn't mean lowering of standards. Actually, standards go higher, but it's more options that if you want to focus on a certain area, the organization will go out and help you enable that. But again, they need to see you as someone who will continue to do that work and deliver value.
Cool. Great, Akash. I think let's just move forward in the interest of time. I think sort of the lot of questions around this is, if I were to go grow in my consulting career, we talked about entry point, we talked about the career roadmap. Now the key thing is, when do I decide to come out and where do I go? So I think uh, the three key areas is, either one goes to, I'll shorten the pill so it makes easier to read. Either you go to industry, um, or now there's a huge flow of consultants to the startup world. Um, there is obviously, if you don't have your MBA, then the most logical point where a lot of the consulting exits actually go and get the MBA. In fact, if you ask a lot of people, and I mentioned it earlier, who are low on the EQ, a lot of them look at MBA as a potential salvation for them to hopefully build that EQ and the team skills and all that, and the softer skills, if you want to call it, around that. So industry obviously have multiple options: new age ventures, private equity, global MNCs. There are a lot of Indian centric MNCs which are now cleaning up their senior management and saying, can we get experienced consultants there? They're tech giants. So Akash is a great example of someone who's gone into, let's say, a Facebook. You could obviously go for a technical master's or a regular or an executive MBA. You could be someone like me and start up your own firm. You could join a core team. You could become a growth consultant. I've known and worked with a lot of people who have become potential investors, actually, because they have worked with so many companies, or they have seen so many things around how companies are built and industries are built, that they have actually gone and found a gap and said, I can now, with whatever corpus I have, go create a small fund or actually become a potential investor. So I think those are some very interesting things. There is also a lot of questions, Akash, around, if I'm a software engineer, I'm working in a typical IT role, 2 years, 3 years of experience, how does one target the MBB? That seems to be the white elephant in the room? Do we have a good answer for that?
Yeah. So, by the
Or
way,
is MBA the only answer?
let me give you an example. Yes, MBA is the dominant answer historically. Let me put it that way, right? So, see, one thing about consulting is, and as consulting as an industry has matured, especially in India, while the standard entry points may still control, say, 70 to 80% of the hirings these teams do. As we talk through the course of this conversation, there are many opportunities which are non-standard. They're partly a function of growth stage of the consulting organization itself, number one. Number two, the capabilities that the consulting firm is building, as they are expanding into more digital, they may look for people who actually have software experience, right? And number three is just, where do these consulting firms now also start to hire from? And at the heart of consulting hiring is someone who can do problem solving. At the heart of consulting hiring is someone that I can have faith in and live in front of my client. At the heart of consulting is someone who can show ownership. Those are the three important traits, especially in the early career stages of being hired as a consultant, right? Now, is MBA the go-to answer? The MBA route definitely helps. And why? Simply because there is a whole process that is around the MBA hiring, right? Consulting companies know that yes, I will go to a certain campus at a certain year, at a certain point in the year, I have to hire X number of people. So there is a standard path to it, but the non-standard path is a function of where the consulting company is growing. So for example, many people who are working in startups now have the experience of growing a business, of seeing business innovation, of understanding how the new era consumer works. There is a lot of demand for hiring such people, because when you go and do large consulting projects, there will be a question on what does the new world look like and how do I hire the people who can help me problem solve as a client on that certain question. There is also, so for example, you made the point around software engineers. For me, it's really about, is there a software engineer who understands what is the value he or she is delivering? How do they help change the business? If you are able to articulate your value, going through MBA, definitely an opportunity, but equally consulting companies publish their roles on their career forums. And referrals. I think Abhishek brought up a great point. Referrals is actually one good way, if you're not taking the MBA route or you're not from the top tier school, to talk to someone in consulting to understand where the consulting company's business need is, right? I think a referral, one mistake people make is, I just call someone I know and I tell him, hey, yeah, this is my CV, just send it, right? That's not going to work. If you are calling someone, first understand where is that consulting company trying to grow, where are their focus areas, where is the space in which they're trying to get their next set of projects, because that's where they need people. Then pick up your resume, edit it for the right type of experiences for that demand, and write a short paragraph on why you believe you will be the right type of person for that consulting company to answer those client needs. That's the referral that needs to go in. Otherwise, you're just another CV in a long list, whether it came from a campus or from a referral, it won't go through. So referral also needs to be done smartly. Abhishek?
Yes, Akash. So I was actually trying to pull up in the interim a slide from the previous workshop, because there seems to be, and I do want to take the time to see if I can if we can actually address it, because I think it's a very critical point. A lot of people look at this list, right, and say, I just want the top three. I don't care about everything else. In fact, there is a much larger and bigger list here. Um, and the idea is, this is not, so consulting is not MBB, right? And I think a lot of people think that, oh, the only way I get into consulting, or the only consulting which matters, is MBB. I have seen people have much better, uh, far better careers, where they've actually given up offers and jobs at an MBB, because they continue to love where they are and what they're doing. And I think this is this is the entire gamut of consulting, right? It is not just this, the top three four things here, where corporate strategy or some policy work or M&A or some kind of organization strategy. Consulting is a very wide gamut of strategy, operations, human resources, financial advisory, and technology, right? There are many types of consulting firms. Um, uh, they are boutique consulting firms, they are large consulting firms. Every different consulting firm has its rhythm, has its advantages. There are a lot of work-life balance items to be thought of as well. So I think, as young people and young professionals getting into it, just don't only think of MBB as the only option. I think that's something I wanted to highlight to all of you, that let's make sure we look at beyond the let's an MBB conversation, because you have to realize, at the end of it, these companies are still very small. There is only that many people that they can actually hire, right? So okay, so Survajit actually had a couple of very good questions. It's actually a nice one to have. You have extremely hectic work-life balances, or work lives, 60, 80-hour work lives. How do you manage an hectic lifestyle? So I'll take a stab at it first. I think both Akash and I traveled like crazy. So at one point of time, I actually didn't have a home. So for almost a 2-year period, I was shuttling between Saudi Arabia, where my project was, New York, where my wife used to live, because she had moved there for a transfer. And I actually had to come back to India every 3 months or 4 months to get a visa renewal for my Saudi visa, and just generally to meet parents and whatnot, and check in on my house and all that. And I did this for 2 years. And in general, I traveled a lot. Um, I basically I think I got to a point where I did a calculation that the total flying time I had was almost 1 month at 37,000 feet. So I had basically lost 1 month of my life, my entire life, just flying in the air, right? So it consulting is, and I think one of the biggest skills is resilience. The mental and physical toll that the career takes of you, it is actually unprecedented, and a lot of people who leave consulting actually beyond a point can't take it because they were not prepared for it upfront. I think the biggest thing as ex-consultants, I think, is of utmost importance for us to do is actually highlight that to all of you that it's very important. I think some things that I learned to deal with it is, for me personally, I center a lot of time around family and a couple of things which would honestly really interest me. So I was always a sports fanatic. So I always found solace in going and picking up a squash racket or going to a cricket nets and playing, or going to the golf driving range, or actually going to the course and playing. That's where um, uh, it was a big thing. So Sujay has a good question. Also, he said that do you need to be traveling regularly? Is it an important part? Uh, till COVID, till COVID, I think it was a huge part of consulting, especially if you were on the front face part. But I think on the post-COVID scenario, I think things may be very different. Uh, we'll see how that works. I'll just take one more question and then I'll pass on to Akash. So rhythm is, I'm a second year BBA student. What do skills I need to take? Hard skills. So I think rhythm is very critical. I think problem solving is one of the most basic ones. Focus heavily on problem solving and real world problem solving. So I know there is a lot of focus on doing case studies and all that, but actually pick up things on an economic times, or where you are actually seeing a company make um, a particular investment, or doing a particular strategy. How have they made it happen? Look at different parts of the business, because as a, remember, as a BBA student, uh, if you can't give me a great business answer, I'm going to be heavily disappointed. You're very different from an engineering student. The expectations on you from a um, business standpoint are very, very important. The other thing you've mentioned that should one look at marketing or finance as a specialization? In an ideal world, I would like to have both, but I would think finance would make more sense, because see, marketing is probably a skill that you pick over a period of time. Finance is something which is good to know from an academic standpoint, especially earlier in the career, and especially if you're looking at consulting. Any thoughts around this, Akash?
Yeah, so maybe I'll go in the same order, right? So the
Uh,
point on work-life balance, right? I think that's a great question. Uh, my take on that is, and partly Abhishek also alluded to that, is consulting is a demanding career. There is no doubt about that. And if you don't want something that takes away, those 5 days are essentially about work, right? If you don't want to have a life like that, consulting is not the right option. I would say that upfront. Now, why is it like that? I think it's just a little bit important to take a step back and say, why is it like that, right? Because there's the way the consulting is sort of teams are located and structured, it's around large economic centers. So most consulting companies will have offices in the big tier cities, and then where they have enough demand, they may put it around the smaller tier cities, right? But there's a higher chance that you are in the bigger tier cities in India, right? Now the clients can be stationed across many more places. For example, there are many large companies that are headquartered in Ahmedabad, right? So there is an inherent need to travel to your client because a lot of work is actually working very closely with them. And this is, of course, a pre-COVID world. How much COVID will change this needs to be seen. but the client also wants to see you, wants to engage with you, right? At the end of the day, that person is paying for your time, right? So there is this a little bit about, have I even seen that person, that who I believe is working for me, right? So travel takes away, travel is important because of that. And by the way, in the consulting career, as you grow up, you'll start with one project, then you'll start to do two projects, then over time you're doing multiple projects. So as you enter the sort of a senior project leader principal role, you are actually going to a couple of different cities in the same week, right? One day you have a large client meeting in Hyderabad, then you're making a sales pitch in Mumbai, and then you're back to your own running project team in Delhi. So that's the sort of nature of work, and hence travel is just something which is difficult to bypass. Now, in that context, what you will see actually people who have sustained this as a career level is, one is ruthless prioritization. And what do I mean by that? What it means by that is, in my professional life and in my personal life, I will reflect back on what matters to me. Abhishek gave the point on what mattered to him was family. What mattered to him was, he likes or he enjoys the time related to sports. Many people enjoy time related to other activities. So you don't want to lose yourself as an individual just because you've taken a profession. Many people are actually very actively pursue their hobbies. They time it in a way that they do it on the weekends. I know of so many people who are marathon runners, active bikers, cocktail makers, artists, and they're doing this with the consulting career. I think the mental model that they've developed is 5 days is more about my work. In the remaining 2 days, I will focus on what matters to me and I will work around that. Second thing, I think, so if that is the frame, how do you enable it? Enablement for that is part of the reason why you focus a lot more on work on those 5 days. You want to avoid spillage. You want those 2 days to be free from work for you to also take a mental break and then focus on activities that you want to work on. Obviously, sometimes, deadline pressures and whatnot, it spills over into your weekends, but that planning from you becomes equally important on how do I manage my week in a way that I am limiting or stopping spillage over to my weekend, right? Third thing actually that a lot of people miss is, to maintain this lifestyle, many people forget about their health. See, look, there is a very easy temptation that I'm staying in hotels, I'm flying all over. There is all sort of, I stop exercising at all. I don't give my broad body any break in a working day. I don't eat quality food. And that takes a toll over time. And sometimes, even if you don't mind the travel, your health is not allowing you to continue to do this. So another important aspect of work-life balance is health management. You cannot do work-life management if you are not doing health management. So I think those pieces have been very critical for me, at least, for lack of better word, to keep my sanity around this. And by the way, one thing you will find in consulting is good consulting organizations are very acknowledging, accommodating of personal situations. So, in a model where I'm away for 5 days, and I've also done certain, US projects and Malaysia projects where I used to go away for a month. And, there is a personal situation at home. You will not actually have to say a lot about, hey, I have a personal situation at home and please let me go. The team itself will stand up and say, we will take over for you. Why don't you go? Take care of that situation and come back. So in that sense, it's any good consulting organization will go beyond its weight to help you out in a personal situation, because it's a people game. Today, I might need help. Tomorrow, Abhishek might need help, and we help each other. So that structure, that culture exists. And because that is an equal part of work-life balance, everyone will run into personal situations. How do you develop a culture where you support your team members in the required way? So for example, if someone has a situation where I have to go to a doctor, the doctor is available only on Friday. It happened with one of my team members. I said, yeah, so just go back on Thursday and Friday, get your medical checkup done. work from that office. One day is manageable. I had a personal situation where literally on a Wednesday there was a board meeting and my wife was not well. I left from Bangalore Wednesday afternoon. My partner took over that board meeting. I actually did not even participate in that board meeting because I had to take care of my wife. So that systems are there. One has to actively figure out how do you leverage that support network. Consulting companies also offer a lot of services. By the way, BCG used to have a concierge service. I have actually never paid a bill myself when I was in BCG. I used their concierge service where they would, come take my bills, pay them for me, get me the receipt. So a lot of systems and effort has been put around by the consulting companies also because they recognize it's a demanding career and how can they best enable it. So that's, I think, the first question that we were talking about. Uh, Abhishek, what's the next question I should take?
I think you answered the travel bit also. That was the
Yeah.
second one. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the flexibility piece is very important. In fact, for me, when I was doing my Saudi project, the company actually agreed to pay for my tickets every month to go to fly to New York to meet my wife. The company was under no obligation to do that, and that was actually not built in the project costing, and the partner had to take a personal P&L hit to actually make it happen for me. So and the only reason they did it because they said we love your skills, we'll want you on the project, and we don't want you to feel stressed at any point of time. You travel and meet your wife just like you would meet her in India. The only difference is you now travel to New York, and I think that is what uh, uh, a lot of consulting companies will do for the best talent. I think there is a lot of questions around electives, um, uh, and in the final year or pre-final year of either MBA or BBA. I think one thing you have to understand, um, a lot of us when we are in colleges and campuses think the only thing we have to show is our electives or our coursework. I think do remember the consulting companies have seen this year on year, every application. A lot of it is actually, for the lack of better things to say, very boring, right? This is not something which will impress anyone. If you have 20 electives, if you have so many electives around operations and you're suddenly applying for a supply chain role, yes, it shows interest, but it doesn't mean much till you actually in the room and we do a proper operations case study, because you could have done a lot of operations elective, but if you can't solve that case study for me, I don't care what electives you did. You could have done a marketing elective and solved my case study and I'll still hire you. So I think as young students and people who are about to graduate, I think we need to get out of that course and academic mindset. The industry works in a very different way. They are not so hung up on courses and electives and all that. I think we'll just move forward. We had this last slide. I think we have just about 4 or 5 minutes left. Akash, do you want to give a sense of which industries you think are going to do well going forward, and if one is looking at building a career in consulting, then something around this?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's some great examples on the slide, but the way I would think about this is, as I was saying, that the way business is run today is fundamentally changing. Even in the pre-COVID world, I mean, and all of us are consumers of many of these businesses. Your focus on going to a bank to deposit a check versus using a Paytm versus using the HDFC app to using the Paytm app. That sort of reflects on how are we as users, as consumers, looking at different uh, services that we consume. And what is business? Business is about serving a consumer or serving a demand. So the nature of demand itself is changing. That's one top layer. So if you think from consumer to the resources that enable the consumer, the first layer is the consumer interfacing industries, and they themselves are fundamentally changing in terms of business models. Then there is a layer which enables these consumer facing businesses, and many of the things here, for example, we are talking cloud computing, robotics, and AI. They are big enablers of how businesses run. Uh, and that there are so many new technologies coming in this space right now. The talent that is required to deliver these services is changing fundamentally. So let me give you an example. I was doing a project for a IT services, large Indian IT services client, right? And internally, one of their focus pillars was how do we develop the right skill sets that we want to offer to our customers, uh, globally, our clients, in the services that we are building for them. And a clear focus in that was some technologies are old, but they are there to manage the existing infrastructure. But many of technologies, whether it's cloud computing, even basic digital capabilities, AI is, I would say, the more upcoming, ML capabilities are the more upcoming pieces. But even those basics of digital are something that even the large companies are still making the transition to. So definitely an area when I look at this bucket of robotics, AI, and cloud computing, digital payment, edtech has gone through the roof in terms of how the digital models work. So these are definitely areas where knowledge of how technology works and how do you structure a business around new technology is a definite game changer that will happen. Another industry to talk about, which is, for example, not here, is media and entertainment. The way we are consuming media at this point, right? I mean, how many of us are watching a Hotstar versus a Netflix versus a TV, right? Especially by age demographics, that is varying a lot. How many of us are actually watching videos on social media, whether it's Facebook or TikTok before it's banned, or Instagram, or even on YouTube? The consumption modelings for media has changed, and that means right from how content is created, to how content is gathered, to how that content is put on a platform, to how it is sold, whether it's through subscription or through advertising models. That's another area where substantially, uh, the requirement of talent has changed. The requirement of the business questions has evolved. Another logistics is already mentioned here, but I think another area to think about is even beyond, I think, digital payments, the whole ecosystem, financial ecosystem, lending, how B2B and MSME loans, how you even assess a startup which has no history and think about whether you want to give them a loan or not. Those fundamental business models and lending assessment models are now changing. A company like any of the new startups, like not new but lending cards of the world, are able to give a small MSME a loan today in half a day. It used to take months. And these are changes due to how the data points exist. So one big piece in all of this is data. So requirement of talent that understands data, requirement of talent on how data can be consumed, and even consulting projects which are around how do we use this data that we are generating in an innovative manner to take new offerings to the market. That's a completely new area for where even consulting companies are engaging to solve different business problems. So definitely, these are some of the big pieces that I would say are emerging areas where even consulting questions are starting to evolve. By the way, another piece to think about is in the traditional industry, how do you digitize traditional business, develop the right kind of data, and use that data not just for what you take to the consumer, but to improve internal efficiency, improve internal processes, bring costs down, improve the time to market. I mean, all the stuff that's happening around Internet of Things. Now, you would have heard that how even Geo, in its focus on, it started with digital for B2C, is now talking a lot of digital for B2B, because that's a whole space where a lot of consulting thinking is ongoing. If I have supply chains, how do I digitize those supply chains? How do I use that to bring more efficiency into the system, manage my costs better, take a better quality, more timely product out there? Amazon is out there solving the same problem. It used to deliver you a product in 3 days. Now it's doing it in 2 days. If you become a Prime member, it's coming on the same day. That's all supply chain improvement through digitization along the way and improving along data points. And that's where a consulting mindset the consulting ability to look at data, assess data, identify problems, and come with good recommendations is of immense value. Abhishek.
Yeah, I think Akash. So the key point, and that's why we call this a bonus slide. We want to share these industries and our viewpoints on this because if you are planning a career in consulting, this is the pitch that you need to take companies with. I can help you solve a project in a particular area in a particular industry. I think one piece that I'd probably add, the final piece, and when you can close out, is logistics. Up till this point, everywhere in the world, especially in India, because we had such a decentralized system, we were trying to centralize supply chains. But COVID has actually suddenly turned the clock back. Would you, if you were sitting in Delhi NCR, would you want one centralized warehouse or would you want five centralized warehouse for all the satellite cities? I think now that's a big question which is being asked. And I think all the move towards centralization may maybe may stop and there may be a lot of decentralization of supply chains, especially with quarantines and all these different things happening and all these different shocks of weather and climate and all that happening. There are a lot of companies may say it's better for me to be decentralized rather than be centralized and then face massive issues as and when a problem happens. So I think that's that. From that, any last burning questions? If not, I think we've reached sort of the time frame. Um, and here's our WhatsApp numbers for MBA Trek. We've started a program called MBA Trek Cares. We do understand a lot of people have questions around jobs and careers at this point. And with COVID, if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything, please drop us a message around this. Our email is there as well. You will all get the recording. If you've registered, you will get the recording and you've attended. Yeah, any last questions, any burning questions? Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was very interesting. We really thank Akash for his time today. It's a good 1.5 hour out of his weekend, so really appreciate that, Akash. Thank you so much for your time. Uh, and any parting thoughts, Akash? Anything?
No, I think first of all, thanks for having me here. I think some of the questions were very interesting. Some of them I've been through in my own consulting journey. So I think a lot of us are thinking along the right lines. My frame, as I said early on, is all about in success in consulting is about how can you solve the problems that others are facing, bringing your skill sets to solve those fundamental problems. B, you are someone who's not going very unidirectional. You are able to take a complete view to the problem and bring more ideas to the table. Third, you are always conscious of the fact that you want to focus on delivery value, whether for your client or for your seniors or for the team members that you're managing, and you have extremely high ownership around it. I think that's the mental model to have. Consulting has a lot to offer just in terms of experience and the growth trajectory that it offers, and it's just a great stepping stone to any type of career that you would like to build in the future. Thanks.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Akash. I think a couple of messages from my end. Consulting is not only about MBB. It is far beyond that. So please remember that. I think work-life balance is very critical. You must understand the nature of the beast before you sign up for it. Um, and I think there was a lot of questions around specializations. I think consulting across the board follows the inverted T model, which means you do a lot of generalist work and then over a period of time you specialize. So it's an inverted T. There's a wide base and then you go straight up once you decide that this one particular area. And I think at the end, it's an IQ versus EQ play. So please remember, you are not only going to get ahead in consulting just because you're smart and you have great brains or you have great education pedigree or are from an IIT or IM or ISB or an RC Munji or a top end school or whatever it is. There is a big people angle, a big EQ angle emotionally. quotient angle that is required to move up in consulting and do well in consulting for a long period of time. And yeah, I think with that, I think we reached the top of the time. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care and have a lovely rest of the weekend. Once again, Akash, really appreciate your time and keep stay tuned. We'll keep moving on the masterclass. We'll look at different industries and different careers soon, and just subscribe to our channels and you'll get the latest information there. Thank you, everybody. Take care.